trigger warning, the following episode contains sensitive content, including but not limited to near-death experiences, suicidal ideation, hospitalization, and the path after death. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to another episode. Mikey on mute, your mind's implode. He's coming off mute for you. Feel the vibe, it's something new.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Mikey on Mute. As always, I'm your host, Mikey, coming off mute to talk about my mental health journey, talk to others about theirs, and really keep that conversation going, make it less taboo. Today, I'm thrilled to have a good friend from the internet here, as most of them are. Everyone, I really am excited to introduce you because this podcast is not your typical podcast. The core of the show is really about healing and developing self-love, and that just it speaks so deeply, and I love that energy. Our guest is the host of Ready Set Share, one of my favorite podcasts. We've been connected since about November of last year, I'm going to say roughly, and it's been on my rotation since. So everyone, please welcome Beverly Danielle. Beverly, how are you doing tonight?
Hey, everybody. Grateful to be here. This is actually really good because my show is in between season 1 and 2, and I feel like this is kind of like an invitation to get back on it because I've been kind of sitting on my heels.
Absolutely. That's a great time. I have really, like I said during the intro, I've enjoyed it for the last few months after we connected. It's really interesting. The first episode I think that I caught or really caught my attention was when you had, I think it was episode 25. You had Brian Harkins, I believe his name is, first responder on there, and EMS talking his, struggles with mental health. And it really hit home. And so that was the episode that really kind of just took it and said, "Hey, this is something I want to listen to." And so I just want to say first and foremost, your show is a genuine interest of mine. This is a big moment for me. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you.
Oh, thank you so much. That like warms my heart because sometimes you kind of wonder, like, as you're doing it, like, is it making an impact? Does anybody care? Like, should we continue? Like, so that's really helpful to hear. It helps me be like, all right, yeah, like, let's keep it going.
Yeah, and I get people that are like, because I'm constantly sharing things out on Instagram, and everyone's like, first off, how are you listening to all this? Well, I work from home remotely, so I'm just music and podcasts are on rotation all day, every day. So, but I generally listen to the ones that I share and connect with and that speak to me, and I just want to make sure everyone knows, like, if I could probably have tons of people come on and talk, but if it's not somebody that I kind of, dig and have that conversation and chemistry with, I don't know if it's really going to be uh, the kind of conversation I have. So have somebody that you and I have talked on online back and forth quite a bit. And like I said, I just feel this great chemistry, and I'm very excited to share your experiences. We've talked about so many different things, and I'm pumped to have you on the show. Like, I sound like a fanboy here. I just keep saying it over and over, but
That's
it's
funny.
true.
Yeah, no, it's totally cool. So the interesting thing about my show is sort of like seeing the trajectory because I sort of like use it to, let people know that they don't have to have all the answers. It's like have a willingness to start because I started it with a friend. So the first 3 episodes is just me and my friend. Like we're both like similar and like kind of quiet. And it was like, oh, we have a lot to say. Like, why don't we just start a show? And I had done, approximately, say, 15 to 17 different guest appearances on shows. So I was like, oh, kind of tired of waiting for people to say yes or looking for opportunities. So why not just start? So neither of us had any idea on what to do. So, I jumped on YouTube, learned how to do it. And it kind of got to the point where like she wasn't really pulling her weight. So most of it was falling to me. And I was like, oh, like, I don't know if this is a good fit. And then her life started getting busy. So she was like, hey, maybe I'll just withdraw. And I was like, okay, cool. And I started taking on the guests and then having no idea what the show was about. There was no like all right, here's like the goal or the mission, none of that. And then as I started having guests on, all of a sudden it was like, oh, like everybody's talking about like healing journeys, and suddenly it all like clicked into place. But if I had sat and thought like, oh, what do I want to be doing? Where is this going? Like, and it's just literally having that willingness to start, like just start, even if you have no idea, and somehow the steps just appear.
I think it's great that you can see that, things don't always fall into place how we think they're going to, whether it be, you think it's going to be a two-person show and it winds up being a one person, or you're not quite sure exactly what it is. But I love that attitude of just starting, like, let's just start and go. That ready, set, share. And I try to speak that out, like when I'm talking to people, they're always like, how do you get people to talk about their emotions, their feelings, or just anything? I'm like, honestly, I just start talking because that's the more I talk and they can feel comfortable, it kind of comes back. So I love that. So Ready Set Share, where did that name title like come from? Was it something you popped into Google, or kind of is there a fun story? What's Ready Set Share all about?
I feel like it's similar to yours because like yours is Mikey on mute. And then I love how you start by saying like, hey, I'm coming off mute. So maybe you're like me and you're more of an observer than a talker. So for me, like my voice was sort of like silenced. Like I had like kind of a tough upbringing, challenging parents. They were hypercritical, and they come from the Far East. So it's very like you need to go be like a doctor or a lawyer or do something with your life, because if you don't do or produce, you're nothing. So it's like anything that I had to say or whatever, like they were just like, be quiet. Nobody wants to hear you. Like, and it just really like suddenly I just stopped talking. So when I was thinking about like show titles, it was like, oh, like maybe it's like ready, set, go. But instead it's like share what you're actually thinking and feeling and whatever's going on.
Makes total sense. Yes, for the longest time, I was a big observer. I still talk to my therapist almost weekly at this point about the same topic, but we'll get there. About a lot of times it was looking for other people's emotions, and is everybody else okay? Is everybody else's energy like off, or how can I kind of be the fixer and all that stuff? So for the longest time, my needs, my wants, my emotions all were on mute. And I always love that classic, I thought it was really cute to come up with that. Also, like what podcasters on mute and all that stuff. So, um, but yeah, it's definitely a turning point, a pivot point when you go from being the observer to being the sharer. And I at first kind of felt some kind of guilt as far as like, oh, should I even be taking up other people's time and all this? I had these really, those heavy should words. Did you have any kind of guilt on your side about like, is this something I should be doing, or how was that experience for you?
It's kind of scary for me because I have a fear of being seen. So for people that look for, ready, set, share, it's mostly on Instagram. It's not really out on a lot of platforms, but it's very like just photo driven. There's no video. Like I love seeing your video posts because like you inspire me because I'm like, hey, he's just doing it. Whereas me, it's like, oh no, don't like look at me, because that hypercritical upbringing, it's kind of like, if, because when I was working with my therapist, it was like, if you can't see me, you can't bother me. Like, I'll just be invisible in the background, just observing where it's safe, right? It's kind of like a survival mechanism. So, like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That
So for
makes
me, it's,
sense. Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to
oh,
cut you
well, I
off
was
there.
gonna say it's not so much guilt because so humans are like highly programmable, right? Like you go to school, like your family teaches you whatever, school teaches you whatever, and like you get into sort of like habits and, almost like autopilot from the subconscious. And when you come up against guilt, it's almost like when you're going against your programming. So if you were more of like, okay, I'm putting everybody else first, and now you're kind of clearing the space and letting yourself be first, it becomes guilty because you're like, oh, I don't like do that. So I tell people when I'm doing like life coaching with them, it's almost like use guilt as like the radar, because it just means you're bumping up against that programming and you're doing it differently, which feels uncomfortable.
Do like that outlook on programming, and we are at the core these hardwired machines. Our brains are problem solvers. And I know you and I had briefly talked about nervous system kind of perspective and all that, and I've spoke a few times on the podcast, and in my own therapy about my nervous system is kind of always on alert. It's very overactive. It's something that I,
Hyper vigilant.
yeah, exactly. Basically on fight or flight 24/7. So with your healing work, where does the nervous system come into? How does that work on your side? I'd like you to like elaborate a little bit more on that if you could.
Yeah, so the nervous system is, sort of like an automatic system that was installed and it kind of like runs your survival basically. So when I talk about it, not being an expert, I can only talk from experience and stuff that I've learned just for those listening. But it's almost like I look at it as like every day you have bandwidth, right? Like your system has so much bandwidth that it can take. So it's almost like, if you've got things going on, you've got stressors, picture it like a rubber band and it starts to stretch out. And when it goes beyond what it can handle, it snaps. So if you've ever had like a day off where you're like, okay, I have a bunch of things to do, I have some free time, and somehow you just end up sitting on the couch almost like with the e-brake on, that's almost what they call like freeze, right? Because there are four responses. There's fight, flight, freeze, and the other one recently found out is fawn. So when you're stuck in freeze, that's that sitting on the couch and you can't get up and do anything because what happens is the system is shut all the way down and all it wants to do is survive. Like those days, you're not hungry, you're not like all of your responses, they're all shut off. Like you almost don't feel anything, you don't notice anything, you're just sitting in one space, just trying to survive. So people that get stuck like that, like I tend to be like, notice like your hunger signals, notice like, are you tired? How are you feeling? Like things like that. Because for me, having been hyper vigilant for so long from that difficult upbringing, it was almost like my nervous system was stuck in the on position. Because you've got two responses, right? You've got the sympathetic response system, and then you've got the parasympathetic response system. So the para is known as rest and digest. So it's almost like when you start to do nervous system work, you'll notice yourself like yawning and doing all those things. That's when you know that system is kicked on and you're no longer hyper vigilant. It's like, okay, I can rest, I can digest, I can just be present. And the hyper vigilant side is almost like picture it like our ancestors, right? Like they were out like hunting and doing all of these things. The thing with the system is it can't tell the difference. Like, are you out like fighting a bear or are you just doing a hit workout in your living room? It can't differentiate because the system is like over 300,000 years old. So the thing is, if you're doing kind of like activities that will activate it and use up that bandwidth, it's like you're automatically stressing the system out even more.
I think that's really insightful and all that. I love the part where you go into the looking for those signs where you're yawning and noticing hunger and all that. And to me, that ties right back to mindfulness, which is such a powerful tool across the board. And I guess I didn't ever think about that. Like those are the times my body's saying, like, hey, we're in a better place. We're a little bit more relaxed and we can do a few things. So it is interesting when you are on those days of almost bed rots and you can't do anything and then you realize at 2 o'clock in the afternoon that you haven't ate and then suddenly, oh my gosh, I could eat an entire pizza. Okay, I definitely need to get up and start moving. It's really interesting how the body responds between that and the mind because yeah, we can go into those days with a laundry list of things that we want to get done and body just won't respond like you were talking about that rubber band. So I really like that part about the look for those signs to be a little bit more mindful.
Yeah, it's difficult because almost, existing in a society where like my upbringing, right? If you're not going, if you're not producing, if you're not doing, it means you're nothing. So oftentimes when the system is shut off, we tend to sort of like judge, like you just wasted a whole day. What's wrong with you? Like the weird hypercritical inner voice kicks over. And it's like
Yeah.
you don't really need that when you're just trying to survive. So it's like
I
noticing
think
the difference.
my critical voice is on no matter what, and I'm like, I'm just trying to get through like making a meal here. Like, can you give me a little bit of grace? But I hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you on that. You've spoken a few times about your upbringing and how it really shaped your journey in a lot of different ways. Do you want to give the listeners and myself a little just kind of overview what that upbringing was like, what lessons it might have taught you, and how it shaped you into your journey as of right now?
So that's almost like opening a can of worms, but that's what we're here for.
That's my favorite
So
thing to do.
I have an overly critical father, but he's also really high on the narcissist scale. So he's a rather challenging individual. So when you read about the individuals that grew up kind of like walking on eggshells and putting other people's emotions first and sort of that codependency thing, because it's always like, how's the other person feeling? What if you activate them? And it's like that could be danger. So the nervous system is like, oh, like we could just got to do whatever to prevent those things from happening. So it's like I grew up walking on eggshells and being like, oh no, like everything is a threat, everything is danger. And then my mom, like she couldn't really go up against that. So she didn't really, like protect us or support us or anything like that. So it was just really, really difficult. And your brain isn't fully developed until you're about 21. So you can't really understand what's going on. So it's almost like you do the best you can with what you understand. And most kids, from my understanding, like, researching into this, it's like they tend to take it on themselves. Like they develop those inner dialogues, like, I'm not good enough, or I'm not enough, or I'm unwanted. And those are the inner stories that are sort of like running the subconscious. That's why when we fast forward into adult life, we tend to draw the situations and people to us that are similar to the upbringing because it's familiar. Like you don't set out and say, okay, I want to go find a narcissistic partner. You literally meet one and it's like, oh, well, this feels familiar. Like my nervous system knows how to respond and how to be within this situation. And then suddenly you wake up one day and you're like, wait a minute, like, why is this like repeating patterns? So it's almost like you have to notice the cyclical patterns in your life and figure out when the cycle is coming and break it by choosing something differently. So I did, in fact, end up with a narcissistic partner. So there's 6 different types of narcissists. We don't have to go into the whole thing, but just like basic overviews from my understanding. He was number 6, which is the covert. So coverts are difficult because you can't actually tell it's a narcissist. So I was with him for a few years and then suddenly like little tidbits started coming to light. And I was like, wait a minute, like he's always making decisions that are in his best interest and all of this sort of weird stuff. And I started noticing these little things and I was like, oh my goodness, like this is no good, but this is coming from that upbringing. And the nervous system will always choose to operate in situations that are familiar. So it's almost like if your homeostasis was built on eggshells or hypercritical or whatever it is, like even how you said your inner voice is hypercritical of you, it's like you don't wake up and choose that. It's just there. It's just running automatically. And in order to break that, you have to notice it and be like, okay, I don't want to do that anymore. So when I'm working with coaching clients and I notice like, okay, like your inner voice is kind of hypercritical, like a lot of people have that. They tend to be really, really hard on themselves, which I tell people gets results, but it doesn't feel good. And how you're feeling creates your experience. So the thing with that is, say if a good friend comes to you and they're like, oh man, like everything just hit the fan. This is awful. I don't know what I'm going to do. Somehow you always know the right things to say, like, hey, you've got this, or, these things like this too shall pass, or won't always be like this, or consider your options, or calm down, take care of yourself. Like you say all these wonderful things. But when it's you, like you just like crap on you, like you should know better. Like, how could you do that? Why did you do that? Oh my God, I can't believe that. And it's a lot of like inner judgment, but it's like, why don't we take how we talk to our friends and give it to ourselves?
It's really, really tough when it comes to that self compassion. It's a big struggle of mine with a lot of people. And I've read a lot of things, especially from Dr. Kristen Neff, who is kind of one of those founders of self compassion. And I'll plug anything, and everything that she does for the most part here. And really, yeah, it's very easy to give advice versus taking it, and it's very easy to give compassion and empathy to others. I mean, we have the capability for the most part. We don't, like you said, we don't wake up and choose things. We are born in a world where we have so much ability to give empathy and support to other people, but at no point in our conversations with our parents or in school or anything like that, even in the media, no one's telling us that we should do that to ourselves as well. And so I think there's a big lapse in the world right now where we need to start talking about self compassion, because there is this generation that's coming up that's trying to break a lot of those molds and notice things a lot earlier. I've seen people, talk about mental health at much younger ages than we did and everything. And so I think it's really something that if I could, say, hey, what do we have to focus on currently in the world? I think it's self compassion. So it's great to hear that you see that as well.
Yeah, it's really needed because, like I said, being hard on yourself does get results, right? Sometimes you kind of need to nudge yourself and be like, okay, like quit messing around, let's do it. But it's like you don't have to go that hard all the time.
Need to find that balance, because it's definitely getting things done, but at the same time, if it's getting things done and at the end you're still like, oh, I feel like crap, I'm not feeling very good about myself, like, what was that worth it? And I I think the one thing I ran across is at some points between my wife and my therapist, they just kind of got blunt. Like, you've been doing the same thing over and over with letting yourself be critical to yourself. And yeah, you've gotten this far in life. You've been able to do a lot of different achievements and all that. But at the same point, it's not working for how you want to. So what's the harm of, switching a little bit? And I think that was really hard for my brain to process and go, well, what do you mean? What's the harm? I've never done it. That unknown. And so I struggle on a lot with, and I try to talk to a lot of people about just those unknowns. And I think we've spoken a few things on unknowns and um, maybe paranormal are out there, and we even got on a conversation that one day about near death experiences and how we had a
Yeah.
similar car accident thing. So I spoke to you a little bit about how when I was younger, there was a car accident with my dad and my uncle, and the seat next to me, the two headrests were pinched together. Like if I had been in the other seat, I'm not here today, which is a weird experience to go through. And then you were able to tell me that you had a near death experience that you were able to almost preview, if you will. Do you feel comfortable sharing that story a little bit?
Oh yeah, that was late 2019. It was like I was sort of like developing like the intuitive gifts and all that sort of stuff. So for those that don't know, I'm from the Northeast. So I used to work down in Boston and I was, driving home from Boston and I had, like a nicer sedan, right? So I'm like driving along and all of a sudden in my mind's eye, I can see the whole front end of the sedan and it's just destroyed. And I heard like some kind of, I don't know, like inner voice or something. I heard something. And it was literally like change the outcome, like change the image. And I was like, what? What are you like talking about? And I'm like, all right. I'm like, the front end is fine. I'm like, it's not destroyed. So I go home and maybe within like an hour and a half, I went to pick up my son and I was going down like a main road that has like a highway overpass and the ramps are coming down. And I guess someone had taken the wrong ramp, like they wanted to be going northbound and they came off on the southbound with me. And at the last minute, they cut in front of me to go the opposite way. And literally, like, I don't, it was like time stopped. Like, I just, something was like, just press the brakes, whatever. And it's like, if I hadn't, like, me and my son would have been just done in 2019. Because, like, it was basically an SUV and the sedan would not, because I would have T-boned him and it would have just, like, the front end would have been destroyed. So it was
That's so
just,
interesting that you
yeah.
saw the front end and feeling almost like a, I don't know if it was exact words or some kind of calling, but to change the outcome. After that experience, did you feel some sort of empowerment with changing outcomes, or was it more so like, hey, something is trying to get my attention. What do I need to focus on? Where did your attention kind of go to at that point after that experience?
So I love like talking about NDE, like all that stuff. So I kind of like looked into that and I've met people that have actually had, where they crossed over and somehow came back. And a few different people mentioned that apparently there's like 4 or 5 different exit points along your lifeline. So if you just decide you're done, you can just take the exit. So to me, it's almost like, ooh, that might have been an exit for me and my son because we were together. And it's like we could have just like copped out in 2019. So part of me is like, a lot of people say that 2019 was like the last good year, you know? Like things have just been real wild since 2020. I'm not sure how to, I mean, depends on people's perspectives and whatnot, but it just like things are just not the same. So part of me is like, oh man, like maybe we could have copped out. Like, geez, but it's almost like we're still here for a reason. And I wouldn't be here having this conversation and, trying to get the information out on nervous systems with you because we're gonna have to go into the different sort of practices I started to, shift it because I feel like people are gonna be listening and they're gonna be like, okay, that makes sense, but what did you do?
I know
But
we're a little scattered here, and I think that's just a part of human conversation. We get scattered, we get excited, we want to talk about. But yeah, definitely let's direct it back to the different nervous systems and kind of
oh yeah, just giving like tidbits on just what people can do. Because for those that are listening and they're like, dang it, I end up on the couch, with the e-brake on, what do I do? And it's almost like you said it yourself, Mikey, where it's like literally learning how to become comfortable in the uncomfortable. Because the thing about life is it's so unpredictable. Like you'll find yourself who knows where, like even to get on tonight, like I was trying to like download something and I'll admit my nervous system started activating because it was like, I can't get on, like we're not going to end up doing this. Just really quick, I had opened, the specific apps and whatnot that you usually record on and it wasn't quite working and I started getting activated because I'm like, what do I do? Do I self-care and tell you let's reschedule, I can't do it or whatever, or like do I offer to send you a link and we try to do it backwards? And so my brain's like all over the map and I'm like playing on the computer and I literally started feeling myself activating and I'm like, oof, I'm like, this is gonna hurt in like 2 days. So essentially what happens is with respect to the nervous system is you don't really notice when it's actually happening, like when you're being activated and the system is like jumping. So it's literally like within a day or two, like you'll find yourself like exhausted. So it's almost like to me, it's like you need to really slow down and like rebalance. That's how I look at it. So for me so far, there's two different modalities that I use. The first one is somatic exercise. So there's a really good, because you said you like to give shout outs. There's a woman on Instagram. Her page is the Workout Witch, and she sort of like demonstrates different somatic exercises. And she actually has a full program that people can join for like 30 days. I haven't gotten that far yet because she does demo some of the moves. So I was kind of like using like different ones and it's just really slow, like repetitive movements. And the point of those is just to literally soothe the body. It's to soothe it, to be like, all right, you don't have to be activated. You don't have to be on. You don't. And I look at it as almost like, when you shake up the soda bottle, you kind of undo the top slowly. You don't just. So for that, it's like once the system is what I call blown out, it means like it took more than you could handle and it just so the that's a really good one to start, just doing the exercises because the body sort of like there was a book a couple of years ago, The Body Keeps the Score. It's almost like all of the stuff that's happened, it's all within like your cells and your DNA. So the somatic exercises helps to let some of it out. And then the recent thing I started doing is tapping. So EFT, the emotional freedom technique. So I've started like a 30-day practice because my sun sign is in Gemini. So I'm here, there, and everywhere. Total commitment phobe. So for me, it's like to be like, okay, like let's do like a 30-day practice or let's do something and actually commit. It's like, okay, like sit there and do the work. So the tapping, for people that don't know, I mean, it's pretty widespread, but it's almost like you tap on different meridian points while speaking like affirmations. And it's almost like you start with like kind of negative affirmations because you're kind of like acknowledging, you're being like, okay, like this is what's going on, this stinks. Like, so the lady that I like to look at, so people can just search like EFT on YouTube and find different videos to kind of follow along. But the one I'm currently using is Julie Schiffman. So she has like a full channel of just all these different ones. So I've been doing one for overthinking because I tend to have a tendency to get stuck in my mind. So it's like, okay, let's just do that and helps me like really calm down and get present.
I think that's great, and I'm definitely gonna make sure it's on my follow list and look up because I love finding new ways of grounding and trying to get myself a little bit more, in the moment. And you said with the tapping and everything, it's even just naming what's going on, and that's been a big tool for me, is naming emotions and giving them some kind of presence, understanding their thoughts, their feelings, and they're not part of who I am, but they are just existing there. So I'm very interested to look up and kind of see if I can get some of those into my daily routine. So I appreciate the shout outs and the extra information on that. Like I said, I'm always looking for ways to calm down the nervous system because
Yeah. Oh,
it's
the
a
other
go
one is
go
breath
go.
work. Breath
Yeah,
work is a big one.
is there a specific kind of breath work you like to introduce or focus on,
So
or
the one
what's
that
your
I like to do is like pranayam. So it's like yoga based. So it's a lot of like the Sanskrit titles and you just do different styles of breathing. So there's different types. So there's ones that can, the two hemispheres of the brain, it can kind of balance them. So you're not either over analytical or over intuitive. It's like keeps it like nice and centered. So I found with breath work, I found it in 2021. There was a young lady doing um like breathwork sessions online because being in the Northeast, like we were shut down longer. So I would join her class every Friday morning. It was at like 7 o'clock in the morning. So I could do it before my son woke up and be like, okay. And I found it kind of like set the tone for the day, which then set the tone for the weekend. And I was like, wow, I'm experiencing like shifts. This is really cool. So I decided to go get certified so I could share it with others. Because silly me was like, oh, I'll just learn the practices and just share it because it's just medicine. But when I got into the program by like the second or third week, I was literally having panic attacks because what it's doing is resetting your nervous system. And when your nervous system has been stuck in a certain, like we talked about being stuck on or in hypervigilant, ready for danger at any point, being stuck on for so long, it literally when you try to like get it to shut off, it won't. It's almost like hanging on, like, no, if you do that, you'll die. So to me, it was basically brought on a bunch of panic attacks.
totally understand there. And I'm really sad that we are basically on time here, and that I mean, because I'm gonna have you back because I could talk to you for hours and hours on end about
Yeah,
this
I
stuff.
feel like
It's
you'll
super
have to
interesting.
join Ready, Set, Share now that I'm more like,
Yeah.
okay, I've got to bring back season two. You'll have to come on.
So everyone on Instagram, you can find the.rss podcast. Also, Hummingbird Energy Healing. The spaces are going to be underscores there. Hummingbird, all one word. Definitely. Is there anything else you want to shout out for Hummingbird or yourself, or any other things we can plug out there and get listeners to talk to you about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like multifaceted. I feel like I have a hand in like every single pot, and I love like studying and just sharing information. So I do life coaching, I do tarot readings. I kind of dabble in like astrology, kind of playing, and then the podcast itself.
Awesome. And I once again I really appreciate it. We've had to push this out from life events and things like that. So I really appreciate you sticking through. I'm so excited. This will definitely not be our last conversation. And so once again, just a huge thank you from my heart for you being on the show today.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, everyone listening, please go check out the Ready Set Share podcast. I'm a huge fan and you will be too. And before my nervous system makes me sweat through the sweatshirt like it usually does anyways, this is Mikey going back on mute. Talk to y'all later. This episode of Mikey on Mute is brought to you by Little Jerk Society. Little Jerk Society is a clothing company fueled by the raw energy of creative rebellion, celebrating those who march to the beat of their own drum. They care deeply about mental health and believe in a world where everyone can thrive, regardless of their challenges. Use promo code Mikey on Mute to save 15% on your order at littlejerkclothing.com. Again, that's littlejerkclothing.com. And remember, use promo code Mikey on Mute, all one word, to save yourself 15%. Go off and make a change.